Thanks for watching Agency in Motion Air Force, sponsored by KPMG. With the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network, I'm Geerges. The requirement for an annual audit was established in the CFO Act of 1990. For the Defense Department to achieve and sustain a clean audit, it requires an enterprise-wide transformation. At the Air Force, auditability impacts every element and each major command, down to the squadron level. The external auditor's current notices of findings and recommendations, NFRs, have only scratched the surface. Success is a team goal that requires buy-in across the service. This 30-minute program will explore the strategy and roadmap for transforming the Department of the Air Force's finance and business operations to achieve and sustain a clean audit opinion. Joining me is Steve Herrera. He is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Financial Management and Comptroller, and Patty St. George. She is a partner for Federal Advisory Services at KPMG. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Steve, I'm going to start with you. Give us an idea of the budget that you oversee and the role as Deputy Comptroller.
The budget we just submitted for FY23, the fiscal year 23, is for $194 billion. That's the Department of the Air Force budget submission that includes the necessary budget authority and the appropriations that go with it for both the United States Air Force and the United States Space Force. Department of the Air Force captures both of those services, so our 75-year-old Air Force and our 2-year-old Space Force, if you will. My responsibilities is to lead and oversee the development and execution of those budgets, to oversee the development and execution and production of the financial statements that are associated with those annual appropriations, and then the cost estimating team which is a pretty sizable team that does a lot of the cost estimating work for all of those acquisition investments that we have to do associated with the investment we need to do for great power competition. You know, the next generation fighter and bomber and space systems that we need to get after to make sure we're ready for that great power competition.
Patty, take us back to 1990 and give us the background of DoD's financial reporting and the role of the CFO Act of 1990.
Yeah, so back in 1990, they passed the CFO Act. That really started to establish the requirement that you need to pass a financial statement audit and that you need to possess the capabilities, go through the annual audit process, and meet that on an annual enduring basis. And back then, really the civilian agencies were probably the ones that were the first to really act on that act. And DoD really followed probably at least a decade and a half later to really embrace it and start to embody and start to put the things in place to start to meet those requirements. And it's been a journey.
Well, we're going to talk about that journey. Stephen, since 1995, the Government Accountability Office has placed the Defense Department's financial management on its high-risk list.
Yeah.
It couldn't produce an auditable financial statement. Explain that. What is that list and why?
We do produce financial statements. We produce an agency financial report, AFR, if you will, annually. The DoD IG basically assessed that our ability to produce a financial statement that was auditable, that could get a clean audit opinion, wasn't there. So we were forced as a department, DoD was required to build this plan or path to getting to a clean audit opinion. And what we called it was FIRE, Financial Improvement and Audit Remediation, or Audit Readiness, rather. And so we've been on that journey for quite a few years now. And we started with sort of incremental small audits, and then like in inaccessible areas like military pay, civilian pay, military equipment. And now we're auditing an independent public accountant, and the Department of the Air Force's case, Ernst & Young, is doing an audit of the financial statements for the Air Force.
So, Patty, the DoD failed to deliver audited statements for over 2 decades. Then in 2017 to 2021, once there were statements, the DoD's Office of Inspector General gave them a disclaimer opinion. What does that mean, and what led to that opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the challenge with the understanding of a disclaimer is that a disclaimer really is in one form of an opinion. There is a unmodified, which is the best. That's what they call clean. Modified, which means you're doing okay, but you got some things you got to work on. And then there's this thing called disclaimer. And disclaimer really is not being able to possess all the capabilities to get through an audit completely. So it's very challenging for the organization to really get through an entire audit, and for the independent public accounting firm to render an opinion. So they're not able to render opinion because they haven't been able to really do a full financial statement audit. So they've been issuing disclaimers lately.
How did things get to this point?
Well, I think, when you look at the history of DoD, it was a war-fighting culture. It grew up with really trying to protect the nation, and much of the focus was on the mission side. And I think once the CFO Act came into play, and Congress started to really start to insist on progress against that act, that's when the DoD really, I think, felt they needed to devote the resources and balance them a little bit more towards financial management and some of these other areas that probably in the past were much more heavily going to mission. Not to say that they're taking away from mission, but they had to give a bit more to some of the areas that were probably under-resourced and probably not being held to a certain level of standards to have to achieve. So when the CFO Act came out and said, you must now start to behave and act and do and perform in such ways, they needed to follow suit with funding. And so that has been a journey of how much funding can you put forth to that, and that kind of dictates a little bit of the schedule as well.
So Steve, are things progressing? Are they getting better, or are they getting worse?
I believe they're getting much better. I often say we're on a marathon. We're not in a sprint getting to a clean audit opinion. So for the general fund part of the Air Force financial statement, we have a goal of 2026 to have an opinion, a clean opinion, and we're making great progress. We have an audit roadmap that is sort of our North Star to guiding us in terms of the corrective actions and the major events we're going to try to accomplish to get after getting to that clean opinion.
Put things in perspective for us. How does the Department of the Air Force do in comparison to other services and components within DoD in making progress towards that clean audit?
We're all making progress, and we're all giving it our very best. One of the things I really appreciate about OSD Comptroller, Mr. McCord, who's the Comptroller, and Ms. Miller, who's the Deputy, they're holding us accountable. They're giving us priorities that we need to be following. But they also recognize that we are in different places in different areas. So they want us to continue to pursue those priorities, but recognize it's not a cookie cutter approach. If I'm closer to fixing military equipment and the Army or the Navy is closer to fixing some other area, real property, for instance, we shouldn't all chase after whatever is closest to one of us. We should continue to do the things we need to do. But the Air Force, the Department of the Air Force, we actually closed on our general fund 2 material weaknesses, or downgraded 1 and closed 1. 2 material weaknesses last year. And material weaknesses are basically a group of findings that in aggregate makes it probable that you would have a material misstatement. And that's a number of material weaknesses is what would make an auditor say, okay, I'm going to have to disclaim my opinion because you have so many of these that I need to just go pencils down, if you will. Because we were successful last year in downgrading 2 material weaknesses, 1 on the general fund and 1 on the working capital fund, and then eliminating a material weakness on the general fund, our ranking we moved up on the DoD rankings, and from a service standpoint compared to Army, Navy, Marine Corps, we're probably leading the DoD right now from a service standpoint.
Well, let's talk about solutions, because the DoD has created audit roadmaps. Give us an overview of those roadmaps and how they can get you to a clean audit opinion.
Last year we had 12 material weaknesses that we were working to correct. And we're not just trying to correct the material weaknesses that are right in front of us that are in our 22 or 23 plan. Rather, we're addressing as much as we can, but we also know what is closest to us from a standpoint of us being able to remedy, address, and correct the findings that the auditor has identified. So for the Air Force last year, on the general fund side, we were able to downgrade our contingent legal liabilities, which is effectively how we were accounting for the liability associated with the potential liability with contract claims, if you will. And then, so what our IPA actually said, hey, you know what, we've looked at what the Navy is doing, you should go talk to them. And so the services share with each other, and we learn from each other, and we leverage some of their lessons, and it's an enterprise approach. So it wasn't just financial managers doing this. We had to work with the Judge Advocate Office, the General Counsel Office, and the acquisition community to make sure we were implementing the recommendations that the auditor suggested. So on the general fund, we eliminated that material weakness last year, and or downgraded that one, and we eliminated our material weakness around internal controls, A123. And so that was a huge event for us because it demonstrated that we're implementing the right processes. We actually have an enterprise risk management framework that we implemented that the IPA said, okay, good on you, and we're leveraging our internal auditor, the Air Force Audit Agency, to help us do a validation of those controls.
Patty, I want to ask you about what you see as the challenges to a DoD auditor in general, and specifically in getting to that clean audit opinion.
Well, I would say one of the issues is in the systems arena, because the proliferation of systems that exist, within the Air Force, within Navy, within Army, there are so many systems that are both financial and what we would call business systems. And so you need to really have your arms around all of the systems. How do they work together? Where all of the handshakes are? How does that data flow between systems? So if you think about the size and scale of DoD and the number of systems and the number of areas, logistics, acquisition, personnel, finance, all of them play in the audit. Because people think an audit is of the numbers. It's actually an audit of the enterprise through the numbers. So really, if you think about our world today and everything being technology enabled, one of the biggest challenges is really understanding that system blueprint and getting control of those systems and making sure they're designed properly, they're implemented properly, because that's the backbone to many of the problems that you're trying to solve. And then I would say on the other side is the execution of what the auditor is looking at is both from a bottoms up, if you think about the lowest level of the Air Force, all the way up to the top, and then top down. So you're really having to address every part of the Air Force. Everybody has a role to play. And when you think about trying to get that many people rowing in the same direction, it's a huge challenge.
But at this point, do we know what all the problems are in order to fix them, or are we still trying to figure that part out?
I would say we know the big rocks. I would say because the audit has been going on since 2017, and we're in 2022, you think of, it's really like an onion. The auditor kind of starts with the outer part of the onion and slowly each year moves further into the onion. Well, I wouldn't say that they've completed the full financial statement audit of every functional area, every finance area, at the depth that an audit requires yet. So a lot of the findings and the NFRs and things of that nature that come out of the audit that help drive the roadmap, there's more to come, but what the auditor has been identifying to date has been probably the biggest and most severe items to date. So at least it lets management get after the bigger, longer term sorts of issues.
Okay, we're going to pause right here and then we'll continue our conversation.
Okay.
Up next, more on the tactics and strategies the Air Force will use this fiscal year and beyond. We'll be right back.
Agency in Motion, Air Force, is sponsored by KPMG. Learn more at kpmg.com/US/federal.
Thanks for watching Agency in Motion Air Force. With the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network, I'm Mimi Geerges. The Air Force is working to achieve and sustain a clean audit opinion. But to do that, it needs to transform its financial and business processes. We'll discuss what the roadmap to success will look like. I'm back with Steve Herrera. He is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Financial Management and Comptroller. and Patty St. George. She is a partner for Federal Advisory Services at KPMG. Steve, in fiscal 2018, the Air Force shifted focus from audit readiness to audit remediation. Right. You're now in the fifth year under audit. Share with us some of those highlights, some of those successes that you've had.
We have some big rock material weakness downgrades we're pursuing in 22, and we're making nice progress. We really have a pretty nice degree of confidence that we'll accomplish what we set out to for 22. I'll describe them to you. One of the material weaknesses that we're trying to eliminate in this fiscal year is funds balance with Treasury. And you say, well, what's funds balance with Treasury? Think about that $193 billion appropriation I mentioned to you. Well, we have several years of large numbers of appropriations and billions of dollars. And as we execute those dollars, the appropriated dollars or funds get expensed. And what is not expensed, what is not actually made in the payment, should be in the Treasury, and we should be able to account for that balance in the Treasury. It's our checkbook. And we're getting really close to having our funds balance with Treasury material weakness downgraded. The auditor has been doing end-of-period testing for us, and they're going to do a couple more period testing for us, but we have a strong degree of confidence that we're going to get that downgraded. The other one we're looking to downgrade is military equipment. Patty mentioned the years of us having systems and capabilities that maybe weren't necessarily built from an accounting conformance standpoint. Rather, we do have positive control of our systems. We know where our planes are. I will look you in the eye and tell you. I can tell you where our planes are. I can look up in the sky and tell you where the satellites are for the Space Force with a microscope. But what we didn't do is necessarily have good valuation of those assets. So, you think about a commercial company, they buy an airplane in their inventory, they depreciate that airplane, they value it. And so our systems weren't built to do all of that computational valuation of those assets. And what we've been working really hard with our acquisition community as well as with our financial management community and our logistics side of the house is making sure we're capturing that universe, that we're doing the right valuation of that, that we're actually looking at, say we buy an F-35, and that F-35 we procured is halfway through its development or its procurement process, manufacturing. Well, that's construction in progress. Our balance sheet needs to reflect that 50% of that JSF is in our inventory.
Well, let me ask you about internal processes. You mentioned it briefly before because that's part of the audit process. Mm-hmm. How are you doing with that this year?
So what we do as we correct our material weaknesses is we have a robust process where we have corrective action plans. Those corrective action plans are things that we do to address notices of findings and recommendations that the auditor has identified for us. And so our focus on NFRs is around those material weaknesses that we are trying to eliminate. And so we go through a rigorous process of internally testing our caps to make sure they're good. Then we turn them over to the auditor to let them test them. And so I'm confident that internal control testing and that A123 method and process that we established last year is lasting because of that rigorous process.
And you had talked about the enterprise approach. Explain the difference between taking an enterprise approach versus a financial management approach.
Well, and I appreciate that question because I think early on a lot of people just assumed it was the Comptroller or the financial community who was responsible for getting us to a clean audit opinion, and that's just not the case. It takes the whole of the Department of the Air Force to get there. Whether it's again getting to those controls. We have processes and steps that we're supposed to use for how we obligate systems into our accounting system, obligate items, spend our money, if you will. So without the entire enterprise making sure we're doing it properly, administering the controls that we have. For material weakness and funds balance with Treasury, we work not only within the department, Some of the work we do is with the Defense Finance and Accounting Service. They're actually helping us close those two material weaknesses. They're very critical to that. So it is an enterprise approach. I would just offer, if we're successful with those two material weakness downgrades, that'll be 70% of the assets in our balance sheet. So to me, that's demonstrable progress if we close those two material weaknesses this year.
And Patty, what are the commercial practices then that can be applied to that enterprise approach for the DoD and its services and components?
Yeah, well, I would say, folks think of the audit as kind of the green eye shade sort of approach of what's going on. But really, what the audit has done for the DoD, which applies to really how commercial deals with things such as this, is they really deal with it as an enterprise finance transformation, or actually really an enterprise business transformation, business/finance. So essentially, every functional community has a seat at the table and has a responsibility to have the controls in place, to have the right data, to have the right system design, to have the right people with the right qualifications in the right place. So really looking at this as a finance transformation or a business transformation, in that all these parties have a seat at the table, and you need governance that really holds people accountable. That is one thing that I think commercial, from a practice perspective, with the centralization of the C-suite, as they call the CFO, the CEO, the COO. When you're in the DoD, it's a much more diffused, larger organization. So to get that governance, to be able to drive an enterprise set of accountabilities and approach through this transformation sort of journey is really challenging. But I would say commercial practices have, if we can borrow many of those things from commercial, that will continue to help really not just get the DoD to achieve a clean opinion, but to sustain it. Because I think there's a lot of Herculean effort to get there, but then you quickly can go backwards if you don't have the right processes, controls, and people and things in place, which a transformation program really helps you think through all of the pieces.
Well, Steve, NFRs, right? Notices of findings and recommendations. If you can just very briefly tell us who determines those and how do you prioritize those?
So the auditor is the one that will issue us an NFR based on a condition or a deficiency that they identify as they're going through their annual audit of us. We used to, initially when we were sort of young in our audit experience, we were just going after the entire aggregate of the NFRs and trying to eliminate as many as possible, and almost a whack-a-mole, if you will. And that really wasn't the best approach. We needed to put a priority on which NFRs could we eliminate that would provide us the best ROI, return on investment, and a return on investment from the standpoint of making progress towards getting to a clean opinion. And so then when we transitioned further to our material weakness focus on our audit roadmap that said, okay, these are the material weaknesses that I'm going to eliminate over the course of 6 to 8 years to get to a clean opinion, that really helped us focus on the NFRs we needed to eliminate and give us priority on those NFRs.
And Patty, the auditor, finds out about those NFRs, but does an auditor play a role in closing them out, in helping to address those?
Yeah, so as part of their audit process, they really take a look at all inputs, various audit findings, whether it's from previous financial statement audits such as NFRs, GAO reports, other things, and they look at the body of information and they look at, okay, has that NFR been remediated to a satisfactory level that if I went in, I could say, yes, it's clean, it's fixed, I have no further issues with it. So the auditor really, as part of the audit opinion that they give every year, they are the ones who make the final call on whether they've resolved, whether the organization has resolved that NFR or not. So they are really the last line of defense to make that determination.
And Steve, in addition to closing out NFRs, how is the Air Force improving its business processes so that it's consistent, it's repeatable, you're not constantly doing the same thing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So can I talk automation? I think that would be a good way to address that. For our general plant property and equipment, we have a number of systems, we call them APSRs, accounting property systems of record, that feed our financial statements for that. A lot of that those systems were not necessarily developed and tied to our accounting system. And so there's an interface that has to occur. There's sometimes manual work that has to be done to make sure that the value and the data is transferred into our financial statements. And so what we've done is leveraged RPAs, or robotic process automation, I believe is the right acronym, or the how you say that acronym. And those RPAs that we've implemented have really eliminated a lot of the manual work that has to be done, and in some cases has taken a 3-week process and turned it into a 3-day process.
And Patty, where does an auditor come in to support the DoD in that area of automation and data analytics?
Well, from an automation perspective, the auditor is going to look at how well controlled is the design of the automation. When you think about threats, can they break into it? Can they make something happen that you're not expecting? So they're really looking at how well controlled is the automation that is designed by an organization, implemented into a process, and can I rely upon it, or is there any risk and threat that there's something hanky-panky that can be going on with it from an automation perspective?
You know, Steve, everyone at the Air Force is there for the mission, right?
Yes,
At the end of the day, how does everything that we're talking about here, the audits, the financial management systems, the processes, how does that all affect and support the mission?
Well, there's a number of ways it does. First of all, a very practical example is a system, an APSR, an accounting property system of record that we implemented for our munitions. TICMS is the name of that system. Used to be that the previous APSR we had for our munitions, our high-end munitions, think JASMs and JDAMs, things that go boom, if you will, and come off of airplanes. We had excellent control over those inventories, but in terms of having real time, this is how many I have in Europe, this is how many I have in Asia, this is how many I have stateside. That was a process that was accomplished weekly. Now we can get it timely, on time, real time. We know exactly where those munitions are. So we're making smarter decisions. We have better awareness of where our inventories are, and we're making smarter purchases and more informed distribution and allocation of our munitions.
And Steve, can you tell us very briefly about the Space Force? Obviously, that's part of the Department of the Air Force, and what the plan is.
So we're doing an entity accounting assessment for the Space Force. And what that means is the Space Force, when it was established 2 years ago, didn't come from nothing. We actually had Air Force Space Command. We had Air Force units that were part of what was incorporated into United States Space Force. We also have transferred into the U.S. Space Force Department of the Army, Department of the Navy activities. So we need to not only parse out our universe of transactions, our balance sheet items, our financial information, so that we can cleanly separate Air Force and Space Force, as well as bring in all of those transfers that came into us. And when we're done with that assessment, we will start producing a standalone financial statement for the Space Force.
And Patty, wrap things up for us, your final thoughts on where things are going for the department in the near future.
Well, I would just say that the overall audit is a journey for the DoD. I think they've got really the right management, the right leadership attention. I think everyone is taking it seriously. I think the involvement of all the different parts of the DoD into getting to that clean opinion, I think that has been a remarkable transformation. So it's really exciting to see where it's going to go.
And thank you for watching Agency in Motion Air Force, presented by KPMG. This is the latest installment of our Agency in Motion series. For more information on the subject matter we discussed today, go to govmatters.tv/AIM and scroll down to Air Force. For the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network, I'm Mimi Geerges.